live now, guys. In three. How's everybody doing? We trust that you've had a good day. Again, I've had a slow day, and I'm not complaining. I'd rather have it slow. It matches my age. Get too fast than it is now, I won't be able to keep up. We're delighted to be here um, with this book, The Revelation. I'm excited about where we're going from here. I do have to admit I am sometimes I'm a little bit impatient with the letters because I be wanting to get to the throne room. So I'm going to try to be thorough as I possibly can. Let's look, if you will, at the second chapter of Revelations 8 through 11. We'll look at the message to Smyrna, and then we'll look at the message to Pergamum. Pergamum. I'm sorry, Pergamum. All right. First of all, remember now the letters. This is of all the apocryphal writing in both Christian and Jewish writing. This is the only one that's regarded as a letter. Um, it's actually more to the true statement of the nature of the letter itself. It's more messages than it is letters. Also, be reminded that there's a constant formula at work with all seven letters. There are things they have in common, and they only deviate at the point of whatever the point of consciousness is for that particular church. Also, be reminded that what we say to the Ephesians, to Ephesus, we also say to Smyrna, we also say to Pergamum. Okay, there's no private message to the church. The whole church gets the letter, so that the notion, the whole idea is seven completion. The whole of the church, all of Christendom, has to deal with these elements. Some more than others. Some it's a greater threat because of the circumstances of the church than is others. But all of them have to consider the things that need to be put in place. Having said that, you'd be also reminded of this is the first century church after the resurrection and the ascension. This is the first century church. This is what was going on when the church was in its infantile state. I mean the organized church, the Christian church. So be mindful of that as we review elements of the church. Pay close attention to what influences the message, and then we'll talk about how to think about it for contemporary application. Okay. All right. Let's read the message to Smyrna. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these are the words of the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your afflictions and your poverty, even though you are rich. I know the slander on the part of those who say that you are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Beware, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison so that you may be tested. And for 10 days you will have affliction. Be faithful unto death. I will give you the crown of life. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Whoever conquers will not be harmed by the second death. Okay, let's look at this. Smyrna was almost 40 miles due north of Ephesus. It was a beautiful city, a very large city, and competed along with Ephesus and Pergamum as the first of Asia, meaning that they saw themselves as the first church, the first state. They saw themselves as superior. They were very beautifully arranged city. The city itself sat at an important seaport, and they had a massive seaport trade. Homer, the poet, is said to have been a resident born in Smyrna. Smyrna was indeed a very wealthy city and a learning center, particularly around the issues of science and medicine. Okay? Um, Smyrna um, periodically would side with Rome through Rome's history in battle or various political things that came up, and they earned the right from Rome to be considered a special little city. And so they were a self-governed city under the rule of Tiberius and successive emperors that came to power to Rome after Tiberius for a period of time. That beautiful paved streets, they were the first in seeing that kind of conscience. They even had a street that was a golden street, said to have had some gold, actually a part of it. But here's the thing, they had temples to idol gods, Cybele, Zeus, Asclepius, Aphrodite, as many as they could get from one end of the street to the other. And they were heavily focused on these gods, and the city was. And so you had these Christians down in this hamlet, maybe about 200,000 population. You got these Christians down in this hamlet of people, and they are real serious about idolatry and idol worship. Smyrna was also championed by emperor worship, that was really big. As a matter of fact, the first temple built to the first emperor was built in Smyrna, okay, under Domitian, as a matter of fact. Every year, a citizen would have to pay tribute in a worship format, and it was more a public presentation of political support than it was worship, but they treated it like it was worship. And the only thing you had to do was just, light some incense and say, Caesar is Lord. That's all you had to do, and get it over with. But it tore up. It tore up the Smyrnanites. They refused to do it. And because they refused to do it, a lot of them suffered great, great persecution. Polycarp, who's one of the church fathers, early church fathers, lived to be about 83, 84 years old. They tried to force him to do the Caesar's Lord thing, and he commented, 86 years have I served Christ, and he has never done me wrong. How can I blaspheme my king who saved me? And of course, they took him out. Yeah, all right. Concerning how the church was founded, we have no information about Smyrna and this church except this letter. Okay? All right. The angel assigned to Smyrna receives the message. And he says to him these are the words. This is what God wants them to know. He identifies himself as the first and the last. Now, the idea here has much to do with the way that Smyrna saw herself as the first city. This is kind of a takeoff on that. She was elitist, and she was very, very loyal. There's no, if you'll notice, there's no indictment against Smyrna. I just got ahead of myself, but we'll get there. The point is, the first and the last who was dead and came to life. Smyrna was destroyed and rebuilt. So most scholars say it's kind of a play on that whole idea of Smyrna being revitalized after death. But it's the dying and coming back to life element that will basically set this piece off, and we'll see it in the end. The second death. All right. He says in terms of the knowledge base, I know your affliction and I know your poverty, even though you're rich. And the third thing he says, I know about the Jews who pretend to be Jews, but they're not really Jews, and you see them and you see who they are. They're just the synagogue of Satan. All right, let's look at that because it's interesting. Okay, now the affliction makes sense because they were not honoring the civil authority. They simply just would not do worship, emperor worship. They would not do it. And as a result of that, they were seriously persecuted and made to suffer. But how could they be in such a rich state, a wealthy state, and yet be poverty stricken? And that was always, the biggest issue about it. Stands out if you pay attention. You're just like, well, wait a minute. I just thought you said they were a very wealthy state, and they were very wealthy, but they were sanctioned because they were not willing to be a part of the emperor worship, not willing to sit at the tables with the idols, and not participating with the citizenry. They were sanctioned, and so they were deliberately made to be poor. So they're being persecuted. They got many afflictions. They're being persecuted economically. And then you've got this sect of Jews who claim to be the descendants of Abraham, but they're not committed to the Abraham commitment to the voice of God. Abraham just believed God. And so the Revelation, John recognizes these people as people who claim to be descendants of Abraham, but don't do what Abraham did. Very much the same argument that Paul makes with the Galatians, and he also makes an argument with the Romans against the Jews. They claim to be the descendants of Abraham, and they claim to want the bounty of Abraham, but they won't commit themselves to the promise of God in Christ like Abraham did to the promise of God in Isaac. Okay, so these people are not really Christ-centered as much as they are Jewish, and they pretend to be. And they sit in the church and they bother the ones who are Christocentric, and they set them up for trouble, and they get them persecuted and punished for things that they say. You know, when they start talking about Jesus is Lord, somebody go, you know that, they're talking about Jesus Lord, and they end up, getting punished, and because Caesar is Lord. You see what I'm saying? So these folk was in the midst of that, just being aggravated. The stirrers. I don't want to, what I'm saying, the stirrers. They sit up in there and wait on them to say something that the government will go off on, and then they tell it, and they have to suffer the consequence. Just stirring up trouble. This is what they were. Okay, so he has full knowledge of their circumstance. But listen to what he says. He says, you are suffering, and you're suffering deeply. And so for another 7 years, you're going to suffer even more. I mean, a perfectly structured church. I mean, they are not falling for any of the craziness that Thyatira fell for, or that we will learn that Pergamum fell for. They were able to discern and to see and function and moved in a loyal, committed way to Jesus. And because of their loyalty and their commitment, he declares that they're going to be inflicted with 7 years of suffering to test their loyalty, to truly test their loyalty. What does that mean? How do you understand that? I mean, you would think that they would, they're willing to die. They go all the way. But the revelation is, don't be afraid, because the next 7 years, you're going to be suffering more than you're suffering now, as a test to your loyalty, as a trial. What is up with that? Now, the loyalty of state was very, very highly celebrated in the area, so that The city was situated in such a way in the evenings that it looked like a crown of gold was around the city as the sun set. And they loved that about the city. And they made a big deal out of it. And they thought it was the God's word, putting a little extra thing on them, giving them a little something, something. And so they would, the citizens that were loyal and most loyal would wear wreaths around their heads and could get their images on coins and stuff along with the rulers if they were very true and very loyal. And so the loyalty of the city state and the emperor worship was premier in Smyrna. And these Christians were just the opposite. And so the revelation is you're going to suffer 7 years like you've never suffered before. And don't be afraid, because you won't die the second death. What do you make of that? How do you hear that? How are you hearing that? George, what do you think?
Well, yeah, 7 more years of suffering.
Yeah. Uh-huh. 3 major areas of suffering, and there is no statement in there that they have done anything wrong or have not been true to what they need to be. There's no assessment of wrong.
Could it be that he's bragging on them?
Bragging? How do you mean bragging?
I mean, he has such, what I'm thinking, he has such confidence in their faith that he can allow them to endure additional 7 years because he knows their stance or their faith would not fail.
So how do you hear, beware of the devil is about to throw some of you into prison so that you may be tested?
That's part of the testing.
What do you mean by tested? I mean, doesn't he know?
Well, not for him but for those that are looking, the overseers or those that are watching, the witness.
Okay, you're doing good. Jarrell, you want to jump in there and kind of balance this thing out?
I'm pretty sure. Okay, there we go. So what was coming across my mind was I heard 2 things. One where who it is that they should actually reverence or fear, not the suffering, but the one who could not only kill the body but kill the soul. That's what I was hearing with the second death. That when they stay focused on their purpose, then they won't have to worry about dying. The dying of.
You're right. You're writing your own story now.
Oh, okay.
Read the text. Okay, you're gonna have 7 more years of suffering, and George is suggesting that it's more of a boast because they're so good at it, because they do it so well, and that the testing is for the onlookers. And I'm asking you to balance that out. Stay with the text and think with the text. Don't go off on your own. We're in the Revelation. We're not in where you was at. Okay. Now remember what I said to you about the civil responsibility of the Smyrnan people with Rome. It's a big thing to be loyal and committed, and they go all out and they worship the gods and they celebrate and they do all the things that are just so Roman. They're just so in there and they just got it going. And John says that Satan's gonna cause some of you guys to suffer as a testing of your loyalty. Now he's already seen their loyalty, so how do you make that make sense? And it's really kind of like it's kind of like parallelism. If they can do that for the state, if they can rally behind one another and honor one another and be loyal to one another in the city structure, then you are citizens of the kingdom of heaven, and you need to do the same. Okay? So they need to see a suffering church, a persecuted church, suffer and be persecuted and not waver, even with the intensity of suffering. So he's suggesting 7 more years of the kind of suffering that they're enduring, and he wants them to do that in front of those who are celebrating loyalty to the state. He wants to see loyalty celebrated to the citizens of the kingdom of heaven. How the Christ function gets the same honor. He does not want to see the believers fall beneath the believers in the city-state. Those who will worship the idol gods and who will worship the emperor are just putting on a show, putting on the Ritz. And he says, I'm going to give you 7 years and extra suffering. So it seems to me that the strengthening of the faith, the strengthening of our faith, should never be divorced from our conditions of suffering. You know, sometimes the message of deliverance is heard loudest from death and pain and agony than it is from the pew and the pulpit in worship. The message of salvation can be loudest in the midst of trauma and suffering. Think about that, if you will. The position, the attitude of your suffering and your status needs to be set aside, and the focus needs to always be the loyalty that you show to the Christ of your conviction. It's a major, major statement on commitment and devotion. Commitment and devotion, even when you're committed and devoted. Do I have any Smyrna members in here tonight? You know, see, we have a line that we draw, and we go, well, I am committed, I am devoted. Well, here's 7 more years of suffering. Let's see it. Can you even think like that? Where the suffering is meaningless. What matters is the endurance and the victory. Oh, come on, somebody! It's real New Testament. It's really what we teach in the New Testament. Remember, with the Philippians, be bound together, be bound together, be bound together. We go down, because the victory is not in going down, but it's going down together, and then we rise. Okay, the idea is the theme. The victory that we have, God's victory comes in our willingness to endure and to suffer. So, given the climate that Smyrna was in, you know, he's saying maybe somewhere in the church he doesn't point out an issue. He simply says, be more devoted and be more dedicated as you're being devoted and dedicated. Betty, can you hear that? No? We do have our standard. We really do have our standard. We really do think, well, I go to Bible study. I mean, I'm there at least 2 nights out of 3 that we have in it, and I'm at wellness. I try to get there whenever I can. I try to, you know what I'm saying? You see that little piece of commitment you got going on right there? So you would not make a good citizen in Smyrna. You know, they're not resting on the fact I have not given myself to the idols. I have not participated with them. They're not backing up on their laurels. They're listening to the voice and aiming for the goals of the faith. You won't experience the second death. That's the reward. So a willingness to suffer, a willingness to endure, a willingness to persevere. When you're persevering, to persevere even the more. There is the strength, the fiber of your faith, the quality of your faith, how it should look, how it should be. You know, you don't just stay with it, and then when you find out you got that bad diagnosis, now you pull it off and backing up because you just you don't fought a good fight, and you still no till the day is done. It's all about the witness. It's all about undoubtedly some of these people were going to die, undoubtedly, because of their positioning against emperor worship. At some point or another, they're going to be compelled to light that incense and say, Caesar is Lord. I can see Pat and I trying not to light that incense and say Caesar is Lord. Come on, somebody. I can see you Lord night going, well, the Lord know my heart. Caesar's Lord. The Lord know my heart. He know I ain't mean that. you know how we try to ease this word in? The reality is it's about conviction. It's about the stronger, the greater the challenge, the more conviction, the harder we push towards our conviction, the more the persecution, the more the suffering, the more the affliction, the more dedicated, the more committed, the more devoted. That's the testing he's talking about. What do you make of that? When he's saying that's the tone of the church of a living God. Okay, that comes from the one who died and came back. And the idea is that one who has been a prisoner and has died and suffered and come back can bring you a message of deliverance from the notion of death and the fear of death and the agony of suffering and the victory of not having to die the second death. It's a real interesting push. What do you make? What do you make of it? Rodney, what do you hear, Pastor Blackman?
It's definitely a test of our faith. That's what I hear. That our faith is authentic in our relationship with Christ, no matter what we're going through.
Let me help you guys with the word testing, because that's an important word. When we hear the word testing in a Western culture, we think about proof. But in the Greek, the word testing and trials is the same root word. They're cognate. The idea here is to have faith that is tried, that is challenged. And the word testing is not implying to determine whether or not it's authentic or real or whether or not it's there, as much as it is to determine its quality and its substance and its nature. Can you hear what I'm saying? Its texture. Try it. It's been tried. It's gone through the fire, and it's gone through excessive fire, and then even more fire, and then even more fire, and it still contains itself. In that sense, testing. Can you hear that? Did that help? Hello, talk to me now. Give me some head shaking. You hear what I'm saying? That our testing, the testing of their loyalty is not about whether or not they'll be loyal, because apparently they have been loyal. There is no there's no statement, you have not been loyal. There's no commandment about it. He simply says Satan's going to do something. And the idea is, whatever this movement of Satan moves against what God is doing, he's trying to force the participant or the believer to undermine God. So it's very important. And by the way, this is the first time that you hear of Satan you've heard of Satan in the Revelation. Now, from this point forward, you're going to hear a lot about him. As a matter of fact, a lot of the Revelation is about him, okay? Because of his deceptive nature. We'll talk about that in a minute. You never really know you really experience satanic energy until somebody points it out, because it's designed to be deceptive. And it's not designed for you to see immediately. You can't go, there it is. No, you can't do that. By the time you see it, it's already done. He's already done. And somebody's pointing it out. Oh my God, you did that? And you go like, oh man, that's the whole point now. Don't think it's like he come in with horns and tails and go, I'm going to make you do evil. No. It's self-deception. You swear to God you're doing a wonderful thing. Look at Paul going down to Damascus to do what? Oh, come on. That was he thought he was doing the right thing. You know, the heritage of the Christian church. And they down here blaspheming God, ain't got no son. So he's going down there and he's just totally self-distorted. Because there were hidden things. There were things he didn't know. And guess who had to tell him? Ananias. Had to hook him up with what to do after that. And with the foot on your chest, I ain't bothering you. Yeah, you are. When you bother them, you're bothering me. Hidden things. Okay? So it's really important that you understand the tenor and the texture of having your loyalty and your faith tried and tested. And usually you will hear those two terms together, tried and tested. Because they're cognates, it's the same root word and they're interchangeable. And the real notion here is trial. You know, you'll meet certain trials to determine what kind of, how do you see it? What, like, take the wilderness experience. Okay, you're the Son of God. Satan never said you're not the Son of God. He said, of course you are. And since you are, why don't you take this stone and turn it into bread? Because you is hungry. Okay, let's just work this thing out. Just go on, hook yourself up, make you some biscuits. Let's do some shopping out here while we waiting. So it was the idea of how do you see yourself more than you're not him. That's Satan's move. So he's saying here that Satan's going to get some of you guys in a real mess. And that's the indication of what? The question of who is Lord is going to emerge. And I know what you have said, but I'm going to tell you for the next 7 years, you're going to be tested to determine the quality of that confession. You got no help in here. And then the contrast is those Jews who are among you who are saying they're Jewish and they're the descendants of Abraham, but they don't have Abraham's effort. They don't have his covenantal consciousness with God. And so, you see, they're Jews, but they're really a synagogue of Satan. Can you see it? That's a statement of a contrasting reality that forces you to deal with the substance and the texture of your so-called loyalty to this Christ. You know, all of us are loyal until our back hurt, till the bunion break out on the big toe, till the knees get to swelling up, till somebody say, I think I know everything, till somebody go to accusing me wrong about what I did on the Wilderness Workers Committee. So the idea is put in place the willingness to be tried and tested as evidence of what you already know, your loyalty to me. I can see me and Pat now raising our hand. I tell you what I'm gonna do. I don't really think I need to be going through no more testing. Like I'm already tired. I ain't got no money. You didn't sanction me. I can't buy nothing. I ain't got no money. You know what I'm saying? If that ain't showing you I love you, I don't know what is. You know, we really do have a problem with really being 100, being authentic, being genuine. We are so rehearsed, you know, and this church, Smyrna, a good church, is being forced to show how good she is. Hey, gotta preach. If I were going to take a subject, I'd go somewhere in there. I know you're good, but how good is you? I Huh? How long can you run with the bell cow, Betty? Huh? You understand this? It's really kind of interesting. He says now, he tells them don't fear. Why would you think he would tell them not to fear? Because fear is not of the Lord, and this is a satanic move. I'm going to tell you. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Come on. About to suffer. Come on. This is you're getting a heads up about what's gonna happen. I can see Teresa now. Well, I tell you what, I'm gonna move my membership to Ephesus Baptist. I'm going down there, baby. I can act right down there, but this here suffering thing. The consciousness of suffering. I don't understand the saints. I don't really understand the saints. We serve a Christ, we love a Christ who is a suffering servant, who died the most brutal death he could ever die to give us the power to live this life and to die that death. But we just don't do well with the theme of suffering in our faith development. We just have an issue with suffering. Smyrna doesn't have that problem. I think I could be a member of Smyrna Baptist. You think you could be down there at Smyrna? I don't have no issue with that. You know, didn't nobody raise their hand and say, don't do it. Don't do it today, but Jesus don't do it. Oh, well, I can hear, you know how y'all do it, but, oh, my Lord, there goes something else we got to learn. Ain't nobody went there. Come on, George. Did nobody act out? Okay? I think it's fascinating that a church already on 3 levels. I know your afflictions. I mean, I know how they're treating you and what they're doing to you. And I know you're poor in a wealthy state. But Satan finna do something to you. He's finna give you some more of what you already got. Suffering. What do you make of that? Y'all ain't talking enough to me about this right here. Now, this here thing is serious. I know, because you think you say too much about being willing to suffer, you scared somebody. I know he'll hit you with something, right? Well, he gonna hit you with it anyway, so don't worry about it. What do you make of this? Paul regards suffering as minor afflictions, these minor afflictions. All the saints handle suffering in a consciousness of the redemptive empowerment of God. It's redeeming, it's strengthening, it's guiding, it's encouraging. But when we get our hands on it, Lord, I'm down here in the little land of sorrow, come see about me. We want deliverance. We already in the line with our hand up. We went to the doctor's office and he told us that child looked like early stages of cancer coming on. And we're already at the church in the line with our hands up in there. Kroger's best oil is splattered all over our foreheads. And we just, Jesus, 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 Jesus. We need him to move that. And that's not an apostolic consciousness. That's not the consciousness after the resurrection. So the handling of suffering with the church at Smyrna, the good church of Smyrna, the good church. What's going to happen to the good church? I'm going to give you some more of what makes you good. Your ability to be loyal in the face of some serious, serious problems. What do you make of that? Chris? Oh, he's not here yet. What do you think of that? Pat, what are you hearing?
For one thing, I kept hearing, the double portion. I mean, when I heard it the first time, it was in line of blessings. But to hear, and really, it's I hear, like George was saying, I hear that boasting, but it's God's boast, and that would be for me such a powerful statement that to have the Lord boast in my confidence and my stick to it.
I can hear that. I can hear the Job consciousness here. Have you considered my servant Job?
Yes.
I mean, I can hear that in terms of Job's commitment and Job's devotion and God's certainty with him. Here is the context is more geared towards civil civil obedience and obedience to a higher consciousness. When you watch the Smyrnites who are not in the church moving, they honor and they're very loyal, they're very committed to the state and to emperor worship. And the revelation is you should look as they look. You should look even greater than they look, because you won't have to die the second death if you endure all that they have to offer you. And that's just affliction and suffering. Okay? There's the little the switch. You see what I'm saying? The flip right there. Okay?
So the parallel is really, and I don't want to use the word loosely when I say boast, but it was talking of the non-Christian, their allegiance to the civil. Am I
right? Yeah, their allegiance to the civil responsibilities versus the church's allegiance to their nation, their God. And he's saying, this is what they do, and ours offers more, so we should be more. But we are at the same time the victims of what they do. So we're going to have to take more of what they do to be superior to who they are.
To get you there. Okay.
Yeah.
It's going to take more to get you there. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, from a racial perspective, you can go to law school, but if there's a certain group of folk that go to law school, got to be real good. Got to be extra good. You go to med school, you got to be extra smart. You got to put up with what's happening normally, and then you got to take the next level. If you're a woman, that's 2 more levels. You see what I'm saying? That's the consciousness that he's working with, you know. And it's a test of their faith to be successful, not a test in the sense to see if they have faith or they have loyalty, but it is the development, the quality. And that's a message about how we should understand our suffering. It enhances our commitment and loyalty to the God who will not allow us any harm to come to us, and we won't die the second death. There's some eternal consequences that can be awarded to us on this side. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Now, I told you again, like, they really saw the crown of life. The city was encompassed with this what seemed to be a crown, and the emperors would have the reaps on the coin, you know, and so the citizens were able to do the same thing if they were very loyal. You know how you get Citizen of the Year awards and things like that in the community. You know, they love that kind of stuff. And they would get their little reap on the head and get put on a coin and be all that. And he's saying to them, saying to the believers, saying that there is a crown that belongs to those who are loyal. And so I need you to expose that loyalty even the more. And some of you are going to be challenged in an area that's going to bring 7 years of suffering to the entire church. Did you hear me? The whole church is on the siege here. But some of you will actually have to deal with it. But it's the church. That's important too. You know, 7 people in it. A few of you cannot suffer, and the others can suffer, and the others do not. It's the body. So the church at Smyrna is going to suffer because of this focus. But this is the victory. This is what gives us our victory. Because if you be faithful unto death, I'll give you the crown of life. Anyone who has an ear to listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches, whoever conquers will not be harmed by the second death. And that was usually the lost, the unsaved people. When they died, you know, the resurrection, then they go to hell. Eternal life. You won't have to die no more. You know, that's where they get that phrase from in the contemporary church. You know, we've been born again, so we ain't got to die no more. Because we actually see our death as sleeping away and not dying. We died to sin, we don't have to die no more. So he's writing it to that regard, okay? Showing the difference between the loyalty to the state and the loyalty to this Christ. Does that make sense? I can't hear you, Jarrell. Does that make sense?
I must have missed something. Where did the 7 years come from?
Where did it come from? Out of the mouth of the one who was first and last and who died and came back to life.
Okay.
What are you trying to do with it?
No, I just didn't see it in the text, that's all.
Huh? Let's see, but I put a 7 and there wasn't a 7 there? I'm sorry. I did. I'm sorry. It's 10 days.
What's up for 10 days?
It's 10 days. Why y'all let me do 7 years? It's 10 days. What's wrong with y'all? It's 10 days. Now I got to go back and do the whole thing again. 10. Nobody said nothing. Look at you. You just let your teacher say, okay. No, it's 10 days. I'm sorry. It's 10 days. I'm reading something else and got caught up with my numbers. Yeah, it's 10 days. I'm not
10
bad.
days is like 7 years.
Well, it's no big difference. No big difference. The whole point is the suffering that you're going to do, I'm going to give you increased suffering for a period of time. And in that period of time, death is real. You could possibly die. That's the whole point. The whole point of the issue is extended suffering. Oh, yeah, let me say 7. I don't know where I got 7 from in my head. But anyway, thank you. 10 days, you'll have affliction. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Yeah. But anyone who has an ear to listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches, let him hear. Whoever conquers will not be harmed by the second death, because he's promising of eternal life.
Now, what I was saying while I was muted was you must have saw my facial expression because I was getting ready to ask that question about the second death. You went and you started answering it.
Yeah, that's another, the eternal life.
So I have a question. In 9b, when it says about the synagogue of Satan, is that like really like a church of Satan, or is that just a group of people who believe Satan stuff?
The synagogue reference has to do with the center of study and focus and ideology. When they go into the synagogue, they're going in for the teachings. They're going in to read from the written. And so the idea is you've got these Jews who are pretending to be Jews and really, because they're pretending to be descendants of Abraham, because they're really not descendants of Abraham. They're more like students of Satan. It's kind of like another way of saying that. But no,
Okay.
that doesn't mean that literally. It's symbolic.
Okay.
My apologies again for the 7 years. I don't know where I got to figure that out. That was deep too. I was going at it 7 years. I was tearing y'all up, wasn't it? Okay. 10 days. How'd you get 7 years out of 10 days? Help me wonder. Don't ever do that. If you hear me say something that's not in the text, ask me about it immediately so I can, because I don't mean to do that. I don't know, that's confusing. All right. And to the angel of the church in Pergamum, write. These are the words of him who has the sharp two-edged sword. I know where you are living, where Satan's throne is. Yet you are holding fast to my name, and you did not deny your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one who was killed among you, where Satan lives. But I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold to the teachings of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the people of Israel. so that they would eat food sacrificed to idols and practice fornication. So you also have some who hold to the teachings of Nicolaitans. Repent then, if not, I will come to you soon and make war against them with the sword of my mouth. Anyone who has an ear to listen to the Spirit, saying to the churches, to everyone who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will give a white stone, and on the white stone is written a new name that no one knows except the one who receives it. Okay. Pergamum shares in the same kind of history as does Ephesus and Smyrna in terms of being a very beautiful, large city, a population that's considered enormous, and a focus on emperor worship and the worship of many gods. There are lots and lots of temples in Pergamum. As a matter of fact, the reference to, he says, I know where you are living, where Satan's throne is. That's a reference to all of, I mean, they got them. They got them, baby. They got 3, 4, 5 of them. Temples that were built, 2 in particular, Dionysus and the snake serpent, the snake god, I can't think of the name. But anyway, it was the god of healing. It looked like a snake, and the other one looked like a bull. And they were big on that. You know, they had T-shirts and everything. You know, it was big time down there. That was a major, but there were all kinds of smaller degrees of worship of all kinds of gods, okay? And in doing that, you got this Christian group who declares to worship the one true God, okay? And that is the apex of a great deal of hostility and resentment in the city. All right? 7:58, maybe we should just hold this one until next week. But read it. It's on the same line as Smyrna. We'll talk about it more in depth, but there are a couple of issues in there that have to do with some very similar things that we just finished talking about with Smyrna, but there is a nice little twist to it, okay? So pay attention to it. This one is also about devotion and commitment, but in a different kind of way. You know, with Smyrna, it was a situation of nurturing and growing and maturing and testing and representing. Here, he had some issues with them. Notice that the difference between Smyrna and Pergamum in terms of the messaging is that Smyrna, he didn't have a problem with them. He didn't assess any negative or any fault. But here, he finds fault with them. We'll look at that next week, okay? All right? That's 10 days, not 7 years, okay? I don't know who that was in here talking about 7 years, but it's 10 days. All right? I rebuke you, Jarrell, in the name of Jesus. It was 10 days and not 7 years. Y'all let me go the whole Bible study saying 7 years. I cannot believe y'all. I tell you the truth. I gotta get me a secretary. Somebody to text me and help me with my words. All right. Those of you who are listening by way of YouTube, it is 10 days, not 7 years. Jarrell was wrong. Okay? All right. Y'all be good. We'll see y'all next week.